The gunshot wound in Grant Parker's shoulder throbbed as he pushed open the front door of his ranch house, the November wind cutting through his thick coat like it was nothing but cheesecloth. He had expected another cold, lonely night in 1878 Wyoming territory, not the sight of a woman collapsed on his wooden porch, her lips blue and her body trembling so violently she looked like she might shake apart. Her thin cotton dress was soaked through with melted snow, her dark hair matted against her pale face, and when her eyes fluttered open to meet his, he saw something there that stopped him cold, not just fear, but the hollow look of someone who had given up entirely. "Jesus Christ," Grant muttered, dropping to his knees beside her despite the sharp pain it sent through his wounded shoulder. He had been shot 3 days ago while helping the sheriff track down cattle rustlers, and the doctor in Empire City had told him to rest. But rest seemed like a luxury he could never quite afford, and now, looking at this half-frozen woman, he knew sleep would have to wait even longer. "Can you stand?" he asked, his voice rougher than he intended. The woman did not answer, just stared at him with glazed eyes that seemed to look right through him. Grant did not waste time with more questions. He slipped his good arm under her shoulders and the other, despite the screaming protest from his wound, under her knees. She weighed almost nothing, and that worried him more than he wanted to admit. Inside, the fire he had built before heading out to check on his horses had died down to embers. Grant kicked the door shut behind him and carried the woman to the settee near the hearth. He laid her down gently, then moved with practiced efficiency to stoke the fire, adding fresh logs until flames leaped and crackled, throwing welcome heat into the small room. The woman had not moved, had not made a sound. Grant grabbed every blanket he owned from the bedroom and piled them on top of her, but she continued to shake. He knew hypothermia when he saw it. During his years working cattle drives north, he had seen men die from the cold, had watched frostbite turn fingers black. "Your dress is soaked," he said, kneeling beside her. "You need to get out of it or you will die. Do you understand me?" Her eyes focused on him for just a moment, and she gave the smallest nod. Grant turned his back to give her privacy and heard the rustle of wet fabric. When he turned around again, she had managed to push the dress down to her waist, but seemed unable to go further, her arms shaking too badly to complete the task. "I am going to help you," Grant said, keeping his voice steady and his eyes on her face. "Just to get this wet cloth off. Then you can wrap up in these blankets." She nodded again, and he worked quickly, pulling the sodden dress off her and immediately wrapping her in the warmest blanket he owned. Her undergarments were damp too, but he left those alone, instead piling more blankets on top until only her face showed. "I am going to make you something hot to drink," he said. "Can you tell me your name?" Her teeth chattered so hard he did not think she could speak, but she managed to whisper, "Rebecca. Rebecca Bailey." "Well, Rebecca Bailey, I am Grant Parker, and you picked my porch to collapse on, so I suppose that makes you my responsibility now." He tried to smile, but she had already closed her eyes again. In the kitchen area of the one-room house, Grant put coffee on to boil and searched for something more substantial. He had beef broth from the stew he had made 2 days ago, and he heated that as well, all the while keeping an eye on Rebecca. The shaking seemed to be subsiding slightly, which he hoped was a good sign rather than her body giving up the fight. When the broth was hot, he brought it over and helped her sit up enough to drink. She took small sips at first, then larger ones, her hands still shaking too badly to hold the cup herself. Grant held it for her, patient and steady, until she had finished half of it. "More?" he asked. "Please," she whispered, her voice hoarse. He gave her the rest, then fetched the coffee, sweet with the last of his sugar. She drank that too, and finally, Some color began to return to her face. The blue tint faded from her lips, and the shaking eased to occasional shivers. "Where did you come from?" Grant asked, settling into the chair across from her. His shoulder ached fiercely, and he knew he should probably change the bandage, but first he needed to understand what had brought this woman to his door. Rebecca looked down at the blankets. "The stagecoach. It overturned about 5 miles east of here. The driver." Her voice caught. "The driver broke his neck. I tried to help him, but he was already gone. I started walking, looking for help. I saw your light." 5 miles in this weather in that dress." Grant shook his head. "You are lucky to be alive. Were there other passengers?" "No, just me and the driver. I was coming from Cheyenne to meet my brother in Empire City, but—" She trailed off, and Grant saw tears gathering in her eyes. "But," he prompted gently, "but I do not have a brother. I made that up. I was running away." The tears spilled over now, tracking down her cheeks. "My husband died 6 months ago. He had debts I did not know about. The men he owed came to collect, and when I could not pay, they said I could work off the debt another way. I knew what they meant. So I took what little I had and bought a ticket west." Grant felt anger kindle in his chest, hot and fierce. He had seen too much of that kind of corruption, too many men who thought they could use their power to hurt those weaker than themselves. "They will not find you here," he said firmly. "You are safe now." Rebecca looked at him with those haunted eyes. "Why would you help me? You do not know me." "Because it is the right thing to do," Grant said simply, "and because I know what it is like to have nowhere else to go." She studied his face for a long moment, then seemed to accept his answer. Her eyes drifted to his shoulder, where blood had begun to seep through his shirt. "You are hurt. Got shot a few days back. It is nothing serious. Nothing serious does not bleed through your shirt." She pushed herself up straighter, some strength returning to her voice. "Let me see it." Grant wanted to refuse, but the truth was his shoulder hurt like hell, and he had been putting off changing the bandage because it was difficult to do one-handed. "All right," he said, shrugging out of his coat and unbuttoning his shirt. Rebecca stood on unsteady legs, keeping the blanket wrapped around herself, and came to examine the wound. Her fingers were gentle as she peeled back the soiled bandage, but Grant still hissed at the pain. "It is infected," she said, her brow furrowing. "Do you have clean bandages? Whiskey?" "Both in the cupboard by the sink." She fetched the supplies and set to work cleaning the wound. Grant gritted his teeth as she poured whiskey over the bullet hole, the alcohol burning like fire. "I am sorry," Rebecca murmured. "I know it hurts. Where did you learn to tend wounds?" "My husband was a soldier before we married. He taught me how to care for injuries. Said it was important knowledge for a frontier wife." Her voice was sad but steady as she worked, cleaning away the infected tissue and applying a fresh bandage with surprising skill. When she finished, she stepped back and pulled the blanket tighter around herself. "You should rest now. Give it time to heal properly." "I will rest when I know you are all right," Grant said, buttoning his shirt back up. "Are you hungry?" "I have stew." "Starving," she admitted. "I have not eaten since yesterday morning." Grant ladled out 2 bowls of stew and cut thick slices of bread. They ate in companionable silence, the fire crackling and the wind howling outside. It felt strange to have someone else in his house after so many months alone, but not unpleasant. Rebecca ate slowly at first, then with increasing appetite, and Grant was glad to see strength returning to her. "You can take the bed," he said when they had finished eating. "I will sleep out here by the fire." "I cannot take your bed," Rebecca protested. "You are injured. You need proper rest." "I have slept in worse places than a settee. The bed is yours." They argued about it for a few more minutes, but Grant was stubborn and eventually Rebecca gave in. She was still wrapped in blankets, her wet dress hanging by the fire to dry, and Grant gave her one of his shirts to sleep in. It hung on her like a tent, but it was clean and dry. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything. You saved my life tonight. You are welcome. Now get some sleep. We will figure out what to do in the morning." Grant lay down on the settee, which was too short for his tall frame, and tried to get comfortable. His shoulder throbbed, and his mind would not settle. In the other room, he could hear Rebecca moving around, the creak of the bed as she settled in. He wondered what her story really was, wondered what kind of men would try to force a widow into such a terrible position. The anger returned, and he had to consciously push it away. Anger would not help Rebecca now. What she needed was safety and time to heal. Sleep came eventually, fitful and full of strange dreams. When Grant woke, pale morning light was filtering through the windows and the smell of coffee filled the air. He sat up, confused, and saw Rebecca standing by the stove, fully dressed in her now dry dress, stirring something in a pot. "You should not be up," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "Neither should you with that shoulder," she countered. "But here we both are. I made breakfast. It is just porridge, but I found oats in your pantry." Grant stood and stretched, wincing at the stiffness in his shoulder. "You did not have to do that. You saved my life. Making breakfast is the least I can do." She ladled porridge into bowls, and they sat at the small table together. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving the world covered in fresh white snow. Grant looked out the window at his ranch, at the barn where his horses waited to be fed, at the chicken coop that needed mucking out. There was always work to be done, injury or no injury. "What will you do now?" he asked Rebecca. She looked down at her bowl. "I do not know. I have a little money, but not enough to go far, and I still need to get to Empire City or somewhere I can find work. Empire City is about 15 miles west of here. The stagecoach runs through there twice a week." Grant hesitated, then added, "But you do not have to leave right away. You can stay here until you are stronger." Rebecca met his eyes. "I do not want to impose. It is not an imposition. I could use the help, honestly. With this shoulder, I am pretty useless around the ranch. If you could help with the cooking and maybe the chickens, I would count that as fair trade for room and board." He could see her considering it, weighing her options. Finally, she nodded. "All right, until your shoulder heals. Then I will move on." "Fair enough," Grant said, though something in his chest tightened at the thought of her leaving. They fell into a routine over the following days. Rebecca proved herself to be capable and hardworking. She tended the chickens, collected eggs, helped Grant feed the horses, and cooked meals that were far better than anything he had managed on his own. She cleaned the wound on his shoulder twice a day, and slowly, the infection began to clear. Grant found himself looking forward to their conversations by the fire in the evenings. Rebecca was well-read and intelligent, with a dry sense of humor that caught him off guard. She told him about growing up in Ohio, about her parents who had died of influenza when she was 16, about marrying Thomas Bailey at 18 because she had no other options and he had seemed kind. "He was kind," she said one night, staring into the flames. "But he was also reckless with money and too proud to ask for help when he needed it. When he got sick last winter, he hid it from me until it was too late. Pneumonia took him in less than a week." "I am sorry," Grant said and meant it. "What about you?" Rebecca asked. "How did a cowboy end up with his own ranch in Wyoming?" Grant leaned back in his chair. "I worked cattle drives for 8 years, saving every penny I could. Bought this land 3 years ago with the idea of building something that was mine. It is not much, but it is honest work and it is mine. No family. My parents died when I was young. Cholera. I was raised by my uncle until I was old enough to work. He was not a kind man. I left as soon as I could and never looked back. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the fire popping and crackling. Grant felt something shifting inside him, something he had kept locked away for years. He had convinced himself he was better off alone. That attachment only led to pain. But sitting here with Rebecca, listening to the sound of her breathing, he wondered if maybe he had been wrong. A week passed, then two. Grant's shoulder continued to heal, and Rebecca settled into life on the ranch with surprising ease. She proved to have a way with the horses, talking to them in a soft voice that seemed to calm even his most skittish mare. She mended his clothes, organized his chaotic pantry, and brought a warmth to the house that had nothing to do with the fire. Grant caught himself watching her sometimes, admiring the way the morning light caught in her dark hair, the graceful way she moved, the sound of her laugh when something amused her. He tried to push down the feelings growing inside him, tried to remind himself that she was only here temporarily, that she would leave as soon as she felt ready. But his heart, stubborn and foolish, refused to listen. One morning in early December, Grant was out in the barn repairing a broken stall door when Rebecca came running in, her face flushed with excitement. "Grant, come quick. One of the chickens hatched chicks." He followed her to the coop, where a proud hen sat surrounded by 5 tiny, fluffy chicks. Rebecca was practically bouncing with joy, and Grant could not help but smile at her enthusiasm. "They are so small," she breathed, reaching out to gently touch one. "I have never seen chicks this young before." "They will grow fast," Grant said. "In a few weeks, you will not even recognize them." Rebecca looked up at him, and something in her expression made his breath catch. "I would like to see that," she said softly. "Then stay," Grant said before he could stop himself. "Stay and see them grow, Grant. I know what we said. I know you were only staying until I healed. But Rebecca, I like having you here. The ranch is better with you in it. I am better with you in it." He took a breath, his heart pounding. "Stay, not as someone working off room and board, but because you want to, because this could be your home too." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. "I cannot ask you to take that on. I have nothing to offer you. I am a widow with no family and no prospects." "You are offering me everything," Grant said, stepping closer. "You are kind and smart and capable. You make me laugh. You make this house feel like a home instead of just a place to sleep." "I know it has only been a few weeks, but I care about you, Rebecca. I care about you more than I have cared about anyone in a very long time." "I care about you too," she whispered. "But what if I am just grateful? What if these feelings are not real just because you saved me?" "Then we will take it slow. We will give it time and see what happens. But please stay. Give this a chance." Rebecca looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, I will stay." Grant felt relief and joy wash over him in equal measure. He wanted to pull her into his arms, wanted to kiss her, but he held himself back. They had time. They would do this right. The winter deepened, and with it, the bond between Grant and Rebecca grew stronger. They worked side by side during the day, caring for the animals and maintaining the ranch. In the evenings, they sat by the fire, talking or reading or simply enjoying each other's company. Grant taught Rebecca to play cards, and she taught him songs her mother had sung to her as a child. It was a quiet, simple life, but it was good. One evening in late December, a snowstorm rolled in with a vengeance. The wind howled like a living thing, rattling the windows and piling snow against the door. Grant made sure the animals were secure in the barn, then hurried back to the house, his face numb with cold. Rebecca had made stew and fresh bread, and the house was warm and welcoming. Grant stomped the snow off his boots and hung up his coat, grateful to be inside. "It is bad out there," he said. "We might be snowed in for a few days." "Good thing we have plenty of food," Rebecca said, ladling stew into bowls. "And good company." They ate dinner, then moved to the settee by the fire. The storm raged outside, but inside all was warm and peaceful. Rebecca leaned against Grant's good shoulder, and he put his arm around her, feeling the rightness of it settle deep in his bones. "Grant," she said softly. "Yes, I have been thinking about what you said, about my feelings being real or just gratitude." She tilted her head up to look at him. "I know they are real. I know because when I think about leaving here, about leaving you, my heart breaks. I know because I wake up every morning grateful to be in your home, yes, but more grateful to be near you. I know because when you smile at me, I feel it all the way through." Grant's heart was racing now. "Rebecca, I am falling in love with you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I think I have been for weeks now, and I am scared because I lost Thomas and it hurt so much, and I do not know if I can survive that kind of loss again. But I am more scared of not taking this chance, of not telling you how I feel." "I am falling in love with you too," Grant said, his voice rough with emotion. "Hell, I think I started falling that first night when you were more worried about my shoulder than your own condition. You are brave and beautiful and everything I never knew I needed." He cupped her face in his hand, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, but Rebecca leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering closed for a moment before opening again to meet his gaze. "Can I kiss you?" Grant asked. "Please," Rebecca whispered. Grant leaned down and pressed his lips to hers, gentle and tentative at first. But Rebecca responded immediately, her arms coming up to wrap around his neck, and the kiss deepened, becoming something more urgent, more desperate. All the weeks of restraint, of carefully maintained distance, fell away. Grant pulled her closer, mindful of his healing shoulder but needing her near. Rebecca's fingers threaded through his hair, and she made a small sound against his mouth that sent heat rushing through his veins. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Grant rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said. "I know it is fast. I know we have not known each other long, but I love you, Rebecca Bailey." "I love you too," she said, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I love you, Grant Parker." They sat holding each other as the storm raged outside, and Grant thought about how much his life had changed in just a few short weeks. He had been alone, content in his solitude but not truly happy. Now, with Rebecca in his arms, he felt whole in a way he had never experienced before. Christmas came a few days later. They were still snowed in, but Rebecca managed to make the day special. She baked cookies using the last of their sugar and wrapped a present for Grant, a new shirt she had sewn in secret during the hours when he was out working. Grant had no gift for her, and he felt terrible about it until Rebecca laughed and kissed him. "You gave me my life back," she said. "You gave me a home and safety and love. That is worth more than any present." Still, Grant resolved to do better. When the snow finally melted enough for him to make it to Empire City, he rode in and bought a simple gold band at the general store. It was not fancy, but it was all he could afford, and he hoped it would be enough. He proposed on New Year's Eve, kneeling in front of the fireplace where they had spent so many evenings together. "Rebecca Bailey, will you marry me? Will you stay here not just for now, but forever? Will you build a life with me, raise a family with me, grow old with me?" Rebecca was crying again, but she was also smiling, her face radiant with joy. "Yes," she said. "Yes, yes, yes." Grant slipped the ring onto her finger and she pulled him up to kiss him, laughing and crying at the same time. They were married in February by a traveling preacher who came through Empire City. It was a simple ceremony at the small church in town, with only a handful of witnesses, the general store owner and his wife, the doctor who had treated Grant's shoulder, and the sheriff who had become a friend. Rebecca wore a dress she had made herself, pale blue cotton with white lace trim. Grant wore his only suit, cleaned and pressed for the occasion. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Grant kissed his bride with all the love and hope in his heart. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, both of them lost in thought, but it was a comfortable silence, full of promise and anticipation. When they arrived home, Grant carried Rebecca over the threshold, making her laugh. "You are going to hurt your shoulder again," she protested. "Worth it," Grant said, setting her down gently and kissing her once more. That night they consummated their marriage with tender passion, learning each other's bodies, bringing each other pleasure. Grant was gentle and patient, mindful that Rebecca had been with only one man before. But she met him with equal desire, and they moved together in perfect rhythm, creating something beautiful and new. Afterward, lying in each other's arms, Rebecca traced the scar on Grant's shoulder. "Does it still hurt?" she asked. "Not anymore," he said. "Not when I am with you." Spring came to Wyoming territory with a rush of green and the sound of birds returning from the south. The ranch came alive with new growth, and so did Rebecca. In March, she realized she was pregnant, and the joy on her face when she told Grant made his heart feel like it might burst. "A baby," he said, placing his hand on her still flat stomach. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" Rebecca asked, suddenly uncertain. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Grant said. "I am thrilled. I am terrified. I am so in love with you I can barely think straight." They prepared for the baby's arrival through the spring and summer. Grant built a cradle from pine wood, sanding it until it was smooth as silk. Rebecca sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her face soft with maternal anticipation. They argued good-naturedly about names, finally settling on George if it was a boy and Rose if it was a girl. The baby came in early October, a long and difficult labor that scared Grant half to death. The doctor from Empire City came to help, and Rebecca's screams of pain tore at Grant's heart. He held her hand, wiped her forehead, whispered words of encouragement even as he prayed desperately for both mother and child to survive. When the baby finally emerged, wailing and red-faced, the doctor announced, "It is a boy, a healthy baby boy." Grant felt tears streaming down his face as he looked at his son for the first time. The doctor cleaned the baby and handed him to Rebecca, who cradled him against her chest, exhausted but glowing. "George," she whispered. "Our little George." "George Parker," Grant said, touching the baby's tiny hand with one finger. "Welcome to the world, son." Fatherhood changed Grant in ways he had not expected. He had thought he knew what love was, had thought his feelings for Rebecca were the deepest emotion he could experience. But holding his son, watching him grow and change every day, opened up new depths in his heart. Rebecca was a natural mother, patient and loving. She nursed George, sang to him, rocked him when he fussed. Grant helped however he could, changing diapers, walking with the baby when Rebecca needed rest, making sure she ate enough and slept whenever possible. The ranch work continued, more challenging now with a baby in the house, but they managed. Rebecca wore George in a sling while she fed the chickens, and Grant brought the baby out to the barn sometimes, letting him watch from a safe distance as his father worked with the horses. When George was 6 months old, a stranger rode up to the ranch. Grant was immediately wary, his hand moving instinctively to the gun at his hip. The man was well-dressed, riding a fine horse, and he had the look of someone used to getting his way. "Can I help you?" Grant called out, stepping between the stranger and the house where Rebecca and George were inside. "I am looking for Rebecca Bailey," the man said. "I was told she might be in this area." Grant felt ice form in his stomach. "Who is asking?" "My name is Charles Winters. Mrs. Bailey's late husband owed me a considerable sum of money. I have come to collect." "You are too late," Grant said coldly. "Rebecca Bailey does not exist anymore. There is only Rebecca Parker now, and she is my wife. Whatever debts her first husband had died with him. Winters smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. I am afraid that is not how debt works, Mr. Parker. The debt transfers to the surviving spouse. Not if that spouse has remarried. I checked with a lawyer in Empire City. Any debts from her previous marriage are no longer her responsibility. It was a lie, but a calculated one. Grant had no idea if that was true, but he said it with enough confidence that Winters hesitated. That may be, Winters said slowly, but I think Mrs. Parker might want to settle this debt anyway, for her own peace of mind. How much? Grant asked, though he had no intention of paying. $500. Grant laughed harshly. $500 for what? What could Thomas Bailey have possibly bought from you worth that much? Gambling debts, Winters said, and the interest that has accrued since his death. Get off my land, Grant said, his voice hard. Rebecca owes you nothing. If you come back here, I will have the sheriff arrest you for harassment. Winters looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Grant's eyes must have warned him off. He tipped his hat mockingly and rode away. Grant watched until he was out of sight, then went inside. Rebecca was nursing George, but she looked up with concern when she saw Grant's face. What is wrong? He told her about Winters, and he saw the color drain from her face. He found me, she whispered. I thought I was safe here. I thought it was over. It is over, Grant said firmly. He has no legal claim on you, and I will not let him hurt you or our family. I promise you, Rebecca, you are safe. But over the next few weeks, Winters did not give up. He sent letters demanding payment. He spread rumors in Empire City about Rebecca's past. He even tried to get the sheriff involved, claiming Rebecca had stolen from him before she left Cheyenne. The sheriff, thankfully, was a friend and knew the accusations were false. But the stress took its toll on Rebecca. She became jumpy and anxious, afraid to leave the ranch, afraid Winters would somehow take George away. Grant finally had enough. He rode into Empire City and confronted Winters at the hotel where he was staying. This ends now, Grant said, backing Winters against the wall. You will leave my wife alone, or I swear to God, I will make you regret ever coming to Wyoming. Are you threatening me? Winters sneered. I am promising you. Rebecca owes you nothing. If Thomas Bailey ran up gambling debts, that was his problem, not hers. You prey on widows because you think they are easy targets, but Rebecca has me now, and I will not let you hurt her. Winters tried to bluster, but Grant cut him off. I talked to the real lawyer this time. You have no legal claim. If you continue to harass us, I will have you arrested. And I will make sure everyone in this territory knows what kind of man you are, someone who preys on grieving widows. Something in Grant's tone must have finally convinced Winters he was serious. The man deflated slightly, then nodded. Fine. I will leave. But you are making a mistake, Parker. That woman is not what she seems. She is exactly what she seems, Grant said. A good woman who deserves better than men like you. Winters left Empire City the next day, and Grant never saw him again. When he told Rebecca that the threat was gone, she cried with relief and threw her arms around him. Thank you, she whispered against his chest. Thank you for protecting us. Always, Grant said. I will always protect you, both of you. Life settled back into a peaceful rhythm after that. George grew into a happy, healthy toddler, full of energy and curiosity. He loved the animals, especially the horses, and Grant started teaching him to ride when he was 3 years old. Rebecca became pregnant again when George was 2. This pregnancy was easier than the first, and in the spring of 1882, she gave birth to a daughter they named Rose, after Rebecca's mother. Rose had her mother's dark hair and her father's green eyes, and she was the apple of Grant's eye from the moment she was born. George was initially unsure about having a baby sister, but he quickly became protective of her, bringing her his favorite toys and singing to her when she cried. The ranch prospered. Grant bought more horses and started breeding them, developing a reputation for quality stock. Rebecca started a vegetable garden that grew larger each year, and she sold produce in Empire City, bringing in extra income. They built an addition onto the house, adding 2 more bedrooms and a larger kitchen. Grant hired a young man named Timothy to help with the ranch work, giving him room and board in exchange for labor. Timothy was quiet and hardworking, and he became like family. The years passed in a blur of work and love and laughter. George and Rose grew, and Grant and Rebecca grew with them, learning and changing, deepening their love for each other with every passing season. When George was 10 and Rose was 8, Rebecca became pregnant once more, surprising them both. She was 32 now, and she had thought her childbearing years were behind her. But their third child, a boy they named Gregory, was born healthy and strong. Grant was 41 when Gregory was born, and he sometimes joked that he was too old to be chasing after a baby again. But Rebecca would just laugh and kiss him, and he would realize he would not change a thing about their life. One evening, when Gregory was 2 years old, Grant and Rebecca sat on the porch watching the sunset. George was out checking the horses, Rose was reading in her room, and Gregory was asleep inside. It was one of those perfect moments of peace and contentment. "You ever think about that night?" Rebecca asked, taking Grant's hand. "The night I showed up on your porch, half frozen and desperate." "All the time," Grant said. "Best thing that ever happened to me. You saved my life that night." "You saved mine too," Grant said. "I just did not know I needed saving. I was alone and lonely, and I had convinced myself that was enough, but you showed me what life could be. You gave me everything." Rebecca leaned her head on his shoulder. "We gave each other everything." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to purple. Grant thought about the years they had built together, the family they had created, the life they had made from nothing but hope and love. "I love you," he said, as he did every day. "I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "I love you too," Rebecca said. "Thank you for finding me that night. Thank you for letting me stay." "You never left after that night," Grant said, smiling, "and I have been grateful for that every single day since." The stars began to appear in the darkening sky, and in the distance, they could hear George talking to the horses, his voice carrying on the evening breeze. Inside, Rose laughed at something in her book, the sound bright and clear. Gregory stirred in his sleep but did not wake. Grant pulled Rebecca closer, and she snuggled into his embrace. They had built something beautiful here, something lasting. The ranch that had once been Grant's solitary refuge was now filled with love and life and family. Years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges, but also joy and growth. George grew into a young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. At 18, he took over more of the daily operations, showing a natural aptitude for breeding horses. He fell in love with a girl from Empire City named Sarah, and they married when he was 20. Rose became a teacher, educated through correspondence courses and eventually opening a small schoolhouse in Empire City. She taught the children of ranchers and townspeople alike, patient and dedicated like her mother. At 21, she married a banker named William, and they settled in town but visited the ranch often. Gregory, the baby of the family, was different from his siblings. He loved books and learning, and Grant and Rebecca encouraged his intellectual pursuits. He went to university in the East when he was 18, the first Parker to receive a formal education. He wrote long letters home, and though they missed him terribly, Grant and Rebecca were proud of their youngest son. Grant and Rebecca grew older together, their hair turning gray, their faces gaining lines from years of laughter and sun. But their love never faded. If anything, it deepened, becoming something rich and complex, built on shared history and unwavering commitment. Grant's shoulder bothered him sometimes when the weather changed, an old reminder of that long-ago gunshot. Rebecca's hands developed arthritis, making sewing difficult in her later years. But they adapted, helping each other, supporting each other through the small indignities of aging. On their 25th wedding anniversary, George and Sarah threw them a party at the ranch. All their children and grandchildren gathered to celebrate. Rose came with William and their 3 children. Gregory traveled from Boston with his new wife, a smart and kind woman named Alice. Timothy, who still worked the ranch and had become like a son to Grant and Rebecca, was there with his family. The house was full of noise and laughter, children running everywhere, the smell of good food filling the air. Grant stood on the porch with Rebecca, looking out at the life they had created together. 25 years, Rebecca said, shaking her head in wonder. It feels like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once. Best 25 years of my life, Grant said, putting his arm around her waist. Though I am counting on at least 25 more. Rebecca laughed. We will see what the good Lord has planned for us, but I will take every moment I can get with you. They were called inside for dinner, and the whole family crowded around the extended table. George said grace, thanking God for family and health and the blessings they had been given. Then they ate and talked and laughed late into the night. At one point, Grant caught Rebecca's eye across the table. She was watching their grandchildren with such love and tenderness on her face, and he felt his heart swell. She must have felt his gaze because she looked up and smiled at him, that same smile that had captured his heart all those years ago. After the party, when everyone had gone home or to bed, Grant and Rebecca sat by the fireplace in the house that had been their haven for so long. This is what I imagined, Rebecca said softly. That first night when I was freezing and scared and thought I might die. I had this flash of what life could be if I survived. A home, a family, love, and you gave me all of that and more. We gave it to each other, Grant corrected. I was barely living before you came into my life. You brought joy and purpose and meaning. You made everything better. Rebecca stood and extended her hand to him. Dance with me. There is no music, Grant said, but he was already standing, taking her hand. We will make our own, Rebecca said, and they did, swaying together in the firelight, humming an old tune they both knew. Grant held his wife close, breathing in the familiar scent of her, feeling the solid warmth of her in his arms. This woman who had collapsed on his porch all those years ago had become his everything, his partner, his love, his home. The years continued their steady march. Grant and Rebecca watched their grandchildren grow, celebrated births and weddings, mourned when they lost friends to age and illness. They faced each challenge together, hand in hand, just as they always had. When Grant was 65, he had a health scare that frightened them both. His heart, the doctor said, was not as strong as it once was. He needed to take it easy, avoid stress, rest more. Grant hated the limitations but accepted them for Rebecca's sake. He turned over the ranch fully to George, who had been running it anyway, and spent his days in gentler pursuits, mending tack, working in the garden with Rebecca, playing with his grandchildren. Rebecca herself remained relatively healthy, though her arthritis worsened, and she moved more slowly. But her mind stayed sharp and her spirit strong. She still tended her garden, still cooked Sunday dinners for the family, still read voraciously and discussed ideas with anyone who would listen. On their 40th anniversary, they celebrated quietly, just the two of them. They took a picnic to the spot where Grant had proposed, where they had spent so many evenings watching the sunset. The land had changed over the years, more fences, more buildings, more life, but this spot remained peaceful and beautiful. 40 years, Grant said, marveling. Who would have thought? I did, Rebecca said confidently. That first morning after you saved me, when I woke up in your bed and heard you moving around in the kitchen, I knew. I knew you were special. I knew you were the kind of man who could build a forever with. I was scared, Grant admitted. I had been alone so long, I had forgotten how to let someone in. But you made it easy. You made everything easy. They ate their picnic and talked about the past, about the future, about their hopes for their children and grandchildren. They spoke of George's plans to expand the horse breeding operation, of Rose's success as a teacher, of Gregory's work as a lawyer in Boston. We made good children, Rebecca said with satisfaction. They are kind and hardworking and good to their own families. We did well. We did, Grant agreed. Though most of the credit goes to you. You were the one who taught them kindness and compassion. I just taught them to ride horses. Rebecca laughed. You taught them much more than that. You taught them integrity and honor and what it means to be a good man. They all learned from watching you. As the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, Grant and Rebecca sat together, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. They had sat this way thousands of times over the years, and it never got old. I would do it all again, Grant said suddenly. Every hardship, every struggle, every difficult moment, I would do it all again for this. For you, for the life we built. So would I, Rebecca whispered. I would collapse on your porch 1,000 times if it meant I got to spend my life with you. Grant turned her face toward his and kissed her softly. After 40 years, he still felt that spark, that rush of love and desire and deep, abiding affection. Forever, he said against her lips. Forever, she agreed. They lived several more years in peaceful contentment, surrounded by family and love. Grant's heart continued to weaken gradually, but he remained in good spirits, grateful for each day he was given. Rebecca stayed by his side through everything, just as she had promised that night by the fire when they first declared their love. One evening in late autumn, when Grant was 70 and Rebecca was 68, they were sitting on the porch as they often did. The air was crisp, and the leaves on the trees had turned brilliant shades of gold and red. George and his family lived in the house now, Grant and Rebecca having moved to a smaller cottage on the property that George had built for them. Grant felt more tired than usual, his breath coming a little harder, but he was content, watching the sunset with his beloved wife beside him. Rebecca, he said softly. Yes, my love, thank you for everything, for saying yes when I asked you to stay, for building this life with me, for loving me all these years. Rebecca looked at him with concern. Grant, are you feeling all right? I am feeling perfect, he said honestly. Better than perfect. I am feeling blessed. He took her hand, threading his fingers through hers the way he had done countless times over the decades. Her hand was smaller than his, marked with age spots and swollen joints, but it still fit perfectly in his palm. They sat watching the sky change colors, and Grant felt a deep peace settle over him. He had lived a good life. He had loved and been loved. He had built something meaningful and lasting. He had no regrets. I love you, he said one more time. I love you too, Rebecca said, squeezing his hand. Always. Grant closed his eyes, the warmth of the setting sun on his face, the woman he loved beside him. It was a perfect moment, and he was ready. When he did not respond to her next comment, Rebecca looked over and saw that he had passed peacefully, a slight smile still on his face. She sat for a moment in shock, then the tears came, hot and fast. But even through her grief, she felt grateful. He had not suffered. He had been happy and content in his final moments. He had died surrounded by beauty and love. The funeral was held at the ranch, and it seemed like everyone in Wyoming territory came to pay their respects. Grant Parker had been a good man, an honest rancher, a loving husband and father. The stories people told painted a picture of a life well lived. Rebecca mourned deeply, but she did not fall apart. She had their children and grandchildren around her, and their love sustained her through the darkest days. She continued to live in the cottage, tending a small garden, reading, spending time with family. She lived 3 more years, long enough to see 2 more great-grandchildren born, long enough to celebrate George and Sarah's 30th anniversary, long enough to make peace with Grant's passing. On a spring morning, surrounded by flowers and sunshine, Rebecca passed away peacefully in her sleep. She was 71 years old, and she had lived a full and beautiful life. They buried her next to Grant on the hill overlooking the ranch, the spot they had loved so much. Rose read a poem at the funeral, and George spoke about his parents' love story, how his mother had collapsed on the porch one freezing November night, and how his father had taken her in. How she had never left after that night. How they had built a life together that became a legacy for their children and grandchildren. Years later, when George was an old man himself, he would tell the story to his own grandchildren. He would speak of love that endured through hardship, of 2 people who found each other when they needed it most, of a woman who nearly froze to death and the cowboy who saved her. "Your great-grandmother never left after that night," he would say, his eyes distant with memory. "And your great-grandfather was grateful for that every day of his life. They loved each other truly, deeply, completely. And that love created all of this family, this ranch, this legacy. Remember that. Remember that real love is possible. Remember that it is worth fighting for, worth building on, worth cherishing every single day." The ranch continued to prosper through the generations, and the Parker family became well known and respected throughout Wyoming. But more than the land or the horses or the success, Grant and Rebecca's greatest legacy was the love they had shared, a love that began on a freezing November night in 1878 and lasted beyond death itself. Their story became a family legend, told and retold, passed down through the years. It became a reminder of what was possible when 2 people committed themselves to each other fully, when they chose love even when it was hard, when they built something beautiful from nothing but hope and determination. The cottage where Grant and Rebecca had spent their final years together was preserved by the family, kept as a shrine to their memory. Inside, Rebecca's sewing basket still sat by the window, and Grant's favorite chair remained by the fireplace. Photos of them together lined the walls, young and in love, middle-aged with their children, elderly and content. And on the porch of that cottage, the porch where Grant had found Rebecca all those years ago, there was a plaque that read, "Here began a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond." Grant and Rebecca Parker, may their story inspire all who come after. The wind still blew across the Wyoming plains. The seasons still changed from harsh winter to gentle spring to golden summer to autumn's brilliant colors. The ranch that Grant had built with his own 2 hands continued to thrive, tended by his descendants who carried his name and his legacy. But more than anything, the love that had started on that freezing November night in 1878 lived on in the memories of those who had known Grant and Rebecca, in the stories told around dinner tables, in the values passed from generation to generation, in the very air of the ranch itself. Because some love stories do not end with death, some love stories become eternal, woven into the fabric of a family, a place, a legacy. Grant and Rebecca's love was one of those stories, a testament to the power of compassion, the strength of commitment, and the enduring nature of true love. And so, though Grant and Rebecca had both passed from this world, their love remained, as real and alive as the day Grant first found Rebecca freezing on his porch and made the choice that would change both their lives forever. She never left after that night, and in truth, she never really left at all. She remained in the hearts of all who knew their story, a reminder that love, real love, lasts forever.